हरे जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय गोपीचन बल्लभा गिरिवरधारी जय गोपीचन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी यशोदानंदन ब्रज जन रंजन यशोदानंदन ब्रज जन रंजन यमुना तीरा वनचारी यमुना तीरा वनचारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा श्रील प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा श्रील प्रभुपदा जय विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजक अष्टोत्तर सदस्य श्रीमती स्वयं वेदांत स्वामी श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। इस्कॉन संस्थापक श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। जय विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजक अष्टोत्तर सदस्य श्रीमद भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोस्वामी महाराज प्रभुपाद की जय। जय विष्णुपाद श्री लकुर किशोरदास स्वामी महाराज की जय। जय विष्णुपाद सच्चिदानंद श्री भक्तिविनोद ठाकुर की जय। जय विष्णुपाद वैष्णव साधु श्री जगन्नाथ दास स्वामी महाराज की जय। जय श्री रूपचांद भट्टर श्री जीव गोपाल भट्टदास अविनाश गोस्वामी प्रभु की जय। नमाचार्य दास ठाकुर की जय। प्रेम से वो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री द्वैत दादर शिवसादि गौर भक्तवृंद की जय। श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरि गोवर्धन की जय। श्री गंधर्व का बेंगलोरेश्वर भगवान की जय। श्री मायापुर धाम की जय। श्री वृंदावन धाम की जय। गंगा माई की जय। यमुना माई की जय। भक्ति देवी की जय। तुलसी देवी की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव की जय। श्री हरनाम संकीर्तन की जय। ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय। इस्कॉन वर्तमान गुरुवंत की जय। समावित भक्तवृंद की जय। गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल। All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada की जय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Divim Saraswati Vyasam Tato Jayamudire Nishtaprayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Sloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishnihi. Hare Krishna. Welcome you all to this Friday morning Srimad Bhagavatam class. Today we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 25, text number 7. Devahutirvacha Nirvinna Nitaram Bhuman Asat Indriya Darshanat Yena Sambhavyamanenha Prapannandam Tamaha Prabho. Devahutirvacha Nirvinna Nitaram Bhuman Asat Indriya Darshanat Yena Sambhavyamanenha Prapannandam Tamaha Prabho. Devahutirvacha Nirvinna Nitaram Bhuman Asat Indriya Darshanat Yena Sambhavyamanenha Prapannantam Tamaha Prabho. Translation Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Devahuti said, I am very sick of the disturbance caused by my material senses, for because of this sense disturbance, my Lord, I have fallen into the abyss of ignorance. Here the word Asat Indriya Darshanat is significant. Asat means impermanent, temporary, and Indriya means senses. Thus, Asat Indriya Darshanat means from being agitated by the temporary manifested senses of the material body. We are evolving through different statuses of material bodily existence, sometimes in a human body and sometimes in animal body, and therefore the engagements of our material senses are also changing. Anything which changes is called temporary or asat. We should know that beyond these temporary senses are our permanent senses, which are now covered by the material body. The permanent senses, being contaminated by matter, are not acting properly. Devotional service therefore involves freeing the senses from this contamination. When the contamination is completely removed and the senses act in the purity of unalloyed Krishna consciousness, we have reached Sat Indriya or eternal sensory activities. Eternal sensory activities are called devotional service, whereas temporary sensory activities are called sense gratification. Unless one becomes tired of material sense gratification, there is no opportunity to hear transcendental messages from a person like Kapila. Devahuti expressed that she was tired now that her husband had left home. She wanted to get relief by hearing the instructions of Lord Kapila. Om Ajnana Ananjana Shalakya Chakshurmiltam Vena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakdamahyam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Udapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sankrajatam Saganar Gunatanvitam Tam Sajipam Satvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sarganar Dakshi Vishakanvidamscha Ye Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radhakanta Namostute Taptakanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Ushabhan Vijite Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kvasnudubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavnebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Om Vishnupada Krishna Bhasta Bhutare Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Gramne Namaste Sarasudeve Gauravani Parchane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pakchatade Siddhartne Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gauri Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Moham Karo Devachalam Bhangam Navedi Kabhata Muhammad Shri Guru Nirtan Paramanandam Shri Chaitanya Visham Namo. Hare Krishna. So here in this verse, Mother Devahuti is telling that she is sick of the disturbance caused by these material senses, due to which she has fallen into the mode of ignorance. So if you see, the whole material world is temporary. The happiness, whatever we try to attain by our hard endeavor, is also temporary. Actually, people want more and more happiness in this material world, and they want less disturbance. But what happens is that they get more distress and less happiness, and for which they work very, very hard to attain this little bit of sense gratification. Nowadays, people have to work for 10 hours and 12 hours, travel long distances to work, for which they have to go through a lot of struggle in terms of the study. And even the studies those days, I remember they were very, very simplified. But nowadays, there are so many fields of study that has developed in the last couple of years that one has to specialize oneself in a particular field of study. And one is not sure whether it will be there eternally or not. When we say eternally, we study for about 20 years, almost 15 years, 20 years, like that, to specialize in a subject. It can also happen by the time one matures itself and gets a job. Maybe that field might not be very important or not relevant for that day. And then one has to struggle to get a job also these days. Maybe if thousands apply, maybe numbers in less than 10 might end up getting a job. And then after getting a job, one may not have job satisfaction. There may be so many problems in the office. Sometimes salaries may be delayed. Sometimes one is not sure of even whether they'll be able to sustain that job. That is the conditional situation today. Very, very turbulent, very, very uncertain. So this is what the material world is all about. And if someone gets all the things that they had desired or they had planned for all the previous years in their life, if they get it also, that opulence might remain for some time, and the happiness that they may get from having that opulence is also will be temporary, because that's what the material world is about. Opulence is temporary, and whatever happiness one tries to get from that opulence is also temporary. And one thing very commonly we find is that among students, they are under a lot of pressure for studies. They have to get higher marks, so they are under pressure. And many times we see students finding it difficult, and then the trend is commit suicide, which is another very abominable act that students perform without knowing what this body is all about. So if somebody has got a lot of money, then the other problem that happens is there is a lot of blackmail going on, extortion. People somehow try to extort money. This way, the whole material world is nothing but a disturbance. Mother Devahuti is actually feeling that disturbance after Katamuni left, and she says that her senses this disturbance has been caused by these material senses. So this is what the material world is all about. And within the short period of 20, 30, 40, 50 years, crossing 50 years these days is very difficult. One may develop attachment to one's family, children, wife, husband, so forth, relatives. And when sometime everybody has to leave. Anybody who takes birth in this material world has to leave. And when they leave, there is lamentation. So in the 6th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, we find actually Narad Muni and Angirashi, they visit King Chitraketu. He was desperate to have a son. So at that time, they didn't give much of an advice. Chitraketu had a son, and for some time, and at the right point of time, the son left his body, and King Chitraketu was lamenting. That's the time again Narad Muni and Angir Rishi came, and they are giving an advice in which, in one of the slokas, these slokas are there, they say, my dear king, now you are actually experiencing the misery of a person who has sons and daughters. That means the king, having lost his son, is experiencing misery. Then they say, oh king, one's wife, his house, the opulence of the kingdom, and his various other opulences and objects of the sense perception are all the same, in that they mean that they are temporary. That means one's possession, whatever he has got, his wife, children, house, kingdom, everything is temporary. One's kingdom, military power, treasury, servants, ministers, friends, relatives are all causes of fear. So what they do is they become a cause of fear, illusion, lamentation, and distress. So when we have all these different types of opulences, we develop some attachment to it. And then we are all the time under fear of losing it. And we are always under illusion, because they are all material and they are all going to be temporary. So we are always under lamentation and distress. So that's why Srila Prabhupada always mentions Bhagavad Gita, hankering and lamentation. We hanker for something we don't have, and when we have, we reach a stage of lamentation by thinking of how we might lose it. So in this verse, they say that these are like a Gandharva Nagara, or a non-existent palace that one imagines to exist in the forest. See, a forest is a desert place where, not a desert, the forest is full of trees and all those things, where animals live. In that place, if somebody is thinking of having a Gandharva Nagara means like Apsaras and Gandharvas, a palace in a place like that, it's an illusion. So here they say that because they are impermanent, they are no better than illusions, dreams, and mental concoctions. So they are not permanent, they are all temporary in nature. So they are no better than an illusion, or it's a dream. Many times one might have a dream, but in the dream, one might see a tiger, an elephant, etc. But actually there is no tiger, there is no elephant. It's actually a dream. So when one wakes up, then he realizes that, oh, I had a dream and this was not true. So similarly, the whole material world is like a dream where one tries to possess many material body, things like material body, children, wife, and so on. But unfortunately, they all have to be given up at some point or the other. We have, like they say that we come empty-handed in this material world, and then we have to leave these things back in this material world only. And then for subsequent verse, they say, these visible objects like wife, children, and property are like dreams and mental concoctions. Actually, what we see has no material existence. It's sometimes seen and sometimes not. And only because of our past actions do we create such mental concoctions. And because of these concoctions, we perform futive activities. So we have got this material body due to a performance of a certain field of activities. And in this body, we have a lot of mental concoctions like possessing this, possessing that. We develop attachment to so many of these things. And in the process, we perform further futive activities in this life itself, which creates a platform for our next life, for the next body. So this is what happens in this material world. And in the process, what happens is that we may develop new tastes for different things, new items for smelling, new items for tasting, and so forth, for which we perform different types of activities. In the subsequent verse, they say that the living entity in the bodily conception of life is absorbed in the body, which is a combination of physical elements, the five senses for gathering knowledge, and the five senses of action along with the mind. Through the mind, the living entity suffers three kinds of tribulation, that is Adhyatmika, Aditevika, and Bhautika. And therefore, this body is a source of all miseries. Here, actually, in this verse, you see that Devavati is actually a liberated soul. Otherwise, she cannot give birth to a child like the Lord himself, Lord Kapila himself, who appeared in her womb. But they are showing what is the condition of a person who is attached to material body and opulences in this material world. So one who is attached to that, through the mind and the senses, they become a source of miseries. There is a quote in Srimad Bhagavatam 5th canto also, where Rishabhadeva also says that this body, although temporary, body is temporary, but it is a source cause of all the miseries of this material existence. And all this is based, the entire material creation is based on mental concoction. We try to enjoy material elements. They are also made up of earth, water, fire, air, and ether. For example, one might have desire to have an automobile. That automobile is also manufactured with these panchabhutas, that is five material elements, that is earth, water, fire, and all those things. And we perceive that with the panchabhutas, that is the knowledge acquiring and senses, and other, like the eyes, ears, we see, oh, the car is looking very, very beautiful. We might want to struggle to maintain it also. But after some time, one might lose interest in it by the same thing that we see every day. And so when we see the same object every day, we lose the interest which we originally had. And then we might leave it as it is, and in the process, dust might gather, and that object does not have any more attraction for us. This is how the whole material world is like. Or suddenly one day the automobile meets with an accident, then we start suffering. That is also an illusion, because our mind is temporary, which is also an illusion. The body is temporary, which is an illusion, but we see it as a reality. The automobile which we bought for our happiness is also temporary, made of illusory objects. We might see to be eternal, but they are not. So it is said that actually the living entity concocts with his mind so many material conditions. We become conditioned by our mental concoction. And that is why we suffer. In seventh canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, Prahlad Maharaj actually, when he was in the womb of his mother, he learned from Narad Muni how everything is temporary in this material world. One's riches, one's beautiful wife, friends, sons and daughters, one's residence, one's domestic animals like cows, elephants, horses, one's treasury, economic development and sense gratification. All this can give, all these are material opulences are temporary and flickering. And since the opportunity of life, human life is temporary, what benefit can these material opulences give to a sensible man who has understood himself to be eternal? That means a man who is sensible understands that this material body is not eternal. Actually, the living entity inside the body is eternal. One should search after the eternity of that and what can help in understanding the eternity. So the same senses which are employed in sense gratification can be utilized in devotional service. And how otherwise, when one employs the senses in the sense gratification, one goes through a process of transmigration, which is mentioned in today's verse. Sometimes one has got a human body and sometimes one has got an animal body. Sometimes one might become a demigod also. So everything has been created by the Lord with a purpose. The senses, the power of the senses, the controlling deities, all are meant to serve the Lord. The demigods are supposed to be the controlling deities of the senses, but they are also servants of the Lord, and they are always engaged in serving the Lord. Lord has given a perfect creation. He has given a bear body by which one can sleep for hours together. Like in the human body, we are supposed to sleep for about 6 hours a day, and they utilize the rest of the time in a productive manner. But if in this human form of life, one develops a desire to sleep for 10 hours and 12 hours, then in the next life, one automatically gets the body of a bear. Sometimes a human being, the human form of life, might have develop tendency to keep shouting or barking. Happens many times. People are very short-tempered. They develop short temper for nothing, for simple things. So if he has also has a desire to eat anything, whatever he wants, next life he may be given a body like a dog where he can bark and eat whatever nonsense that he wants. So this is how the transmigration takes place from one body to another. During Srila Prabhupada times, in one of the Pandal programs, Prabhupada actually mentions about this transmigration. So one person got up and said, what is wrong if I become a dog in the next life? I will still enjoy life like a dog. So Sir Prabhupada mentioned that trying to enjoy life in this human form of life is like trying to enjoy sweet rice mixed with sand. So sweet rice is very sweet, but if it is mixed with sand and given, one will not like it. So that is what the human life, one tries to enjoy. Like whereas this person who in the Pandal program asked, what is wrong if I become a dog in the next life? So in this life itself, if one thinks that what happens that even if I become a dog, so that is how we can understand how degraded people are. Another example of given in the Srimad Bhagavatam about sense gratification is about a camel. A camel is used to eating uh, thorny bushes or plants with a lot of thorns in it. And in the process, what happens is that when it eats, blood comes out wherever the thorn pierces, and the camel tastes it to be very nice. But actually, the camel is trying to eat its own blood and tasting it, thinking that it is enjoying, but actually it is sucking its own blood. This is how the whole material world is. And how the transmigration takes place is also given. Like a caterpillar, it transports from one leaf to another even before giving up the other. That means before caterpillar, what it does is it jumps over to another leaf before giving up the present leaf on which it is staying. Similarly, according to our work that we have performed, we have already decided to capture one type of body in our next life. And this is how the whole desires are built up, on which the mind is like a reservoir of all these desires. And we develop a body in the next life, depending on what we do in this life. And this way, transmigration keeps going on. And everyone thinks but that they are enjoying. For example, the politicians, they don't want to leave their post. They want to be eternally in their post until they leave their body. Or even if they want to leave, they want to see somehow that their next generation continue the same position, or they enjoy the same post like their forefathers. And by superior arrangement, what happens is that whatever acts they have performed in that, the Lord makes arrangement for them to be transferred to another body. This is actually given by the laws of material nature, which generally people don't understand. And what is this happiness that one can get after getting whatever material position or opulence is there? Here, Sri Narthmuni explains to Sri Vyasadeva in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. He says, persons who are actually intelligent and philosophically inclined should endeavor only for that purposeful end which is not obtainable even by wandering from the topmost planet Brahmaloka down to the lowest planet Patala. As far as happiness derived from sense gratification is concerned, it can be obtained automatically in course of time, just as in course of time we obtain miseries even though we do not desire them. See, we don't desire miseries, but they come automatically. So when we develop attachment to members in the family, when they leave, sometimes they may leave on a short duration, going abroad or something like that. But we develop distress, and then some a day somebody has they have to live forever, living for good. So when we have attachment, then what happens is that we develop distress. And that is a time an intelligent person is one who thinks, why am I having this disgusted feeling in mind? That is when an intelligent person takes the shelter of the Lord and then takes say, the path of spiritual life. So that is why it is mentioned that Devahuti actually felt distressed, deeply distressed after her husband left home. And then she wanted to get relief by hearing instructions from Lord Kapila, which will be explained in the future verses. Lord Kapila explained the Sankhya philosophy, by which he explains how this body is temporary, how it is made up of all the material elements, and so forth. The same thing, if we see, Arjuna did not want to fight because of attachment to his kith and kin. But later, when the Lord recited Bhagavad Gita, explaining the essence of Gita, then he decided to fight. So one who is intelligent, he takes up the spiritual path and understands that whatever misery that I have gone through or whatever I'm going through is for my own good, then he surrenders to the Lord. Another example that is given in Srimad Bhagavatam is about Parishit Maharaj. How when he was cursed, he immediately left all his opulence, his family, his kingdom, everything he left, and he immediately came to take shelter of a saintly person, Sukadeva Goswami, to hear Srimad Bhagavatam. So the point is that whatever sense gratification or happiness that we look at trying to get from the sense gratification, it has a beginning and it has an end also. And where happiness is there, distress also is there. It is not that one will always have happiness, and it is not that one will always have distress. But one who violates regulations that are given in the scriptures are degraded to lower species of life, irrespective of whoever it is, whether it is a human being or it's a demigod. In Srimad Bhagavatam, there is an example given as to how Indra, the king of heaven, he desired to have union with the spiritual master Brihaspati's wife. So ultimately, he had to take the body of a hog in the next life. And at that time, when Brahma came and approached Indra, who was a hog at that time, he was enjoying. He did not want to go back to his earlier position as Indra, but because he was enjoying life as a hog also. So a human being also enjoys life. A demigod also thinks that they are enjoying life, and a lower grade of species, for example, a hog or trees, they also think that they are enjoying their life. The demigods think, because it is said in the moon planet, there is a beverage called Somarasa, where people, living entities, they drink and derive some pleasure. Like we see here, people drinking liquor, and they think that they're enjoying, but actually one who drinks liquor is not enjoying, he is suffering. On the other hand, it is said that it is not that a person drinks liquor, but one who drinks, the drink is drinking that living being, that person who is drinking, because he is getting habituated to drinking to such a way that the liquor is actually drinking that person's life. So like that, there are facilities for enjoyment on all the higher planets also which are available. But the point is that all are temporary. Prahlad Maharaj, in fact, in his prayers which he offers to Lord Narasimhadeva, he says very nicely, "My dear Lord, oh infallible one, my position is like that of a person who has many wives, all trying to attract him in their own way. For example, the tongue is attracted to eating palatable dishes, the genitals to sex with an attractive woman, and the sense of touch to contact with soft things. The belly, although filled, still wants to eat more, because we see many times people may not be hungry, but still they want to eat more and more. And the ear not attempt to hear about you is generally attracted to cinema songs. So we see people have attraction to hearing cinema songs to such an extent that they go on hearing, and they don't want to hear for themselves, but they put the music so loud that every day we find some progress, because it creates a disturbance for others. The sense of smell is attracted to yet another side. The eyes are attracted to scenes of sense gratification. Every day we want to see something new. And this way, the senses are attracted elsewhere all the time. And this way, he says that I'm certainly embarrassed. So this is how any living entity is always, who is running after sense gratification, is always put into a distress situation. And one who is intelligent takes shelter of the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. In the fourth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, there is a description of how this happiness in this material world is like, where there is a discussion. The verse says, "My dear king, woman in the beginning is very attractive, but in the end very disturbing. Is exactly like the flower, which is attractive in the beginning and detestable at the end." That means it is not only the woman. Same thing for the man also. The man looks at a woman looks at a man in a very attractive way. But the same man who is looking attractive is not having the same attraction at the end of his life, because he's aged. His body develops wrinkles, becomes weak. So many things are there. So with the association of the opposite sex, one becomes entangled in lusty desires. He enjoys sex just as one enjoys the aroma of a flower. When we bring a flower, nice, attractive flower, the flower looks very attractive. And we see that fragrance is also very nice. But after some time, the fragrance is lost. So similarly, right from one's tongue to genitals, living entities consider themselves to be very happily situated in family life. And united with his wife or husband, one remains absorbed in such thoughts. And they try to derive great pleasure, which are all temporary. The man always thinks of pleasant talks with his wife and children, which are like sweet humming of the bumblebees. The bumblebees actually collect honey and they go from flower to flower. And in the process, they make such nice, beautiful sound that similarly, a person who is attached to family life is always thinking wherever he is of the nice, pleasurable talks of one's wife and children. Similarly, wife might think about her husband and children when they are away at the school or office. And in the process, he forgets that before him is time, which is taking away his lifespan with the passing of day and night. This time, in the form of day and night, takes every moment of every living entity, which no one is able to realize. Actually, when the morning starts, we don't know how the day comes to an end, and the night starts. And the night starts immediately, we find when we get up in the morning, it's the beginning of the day. But the time is in the form of day and night, is taking away every moment of one's life. And one does not know that time comes in the form of death and tries to take everything. So this is the position of all the living entities, and they are surrounded by this threat from all the sides. When there is a sense gratification, time passes very fast. Like for example, sometimes we might enjoy something, but we don't realize that the time is passing very, very fast. But other times, when actually one might think that they are suffering, the time might be passing very, very slow. One might wonder why time is not passing. So this is all relative in this material world. So Prahlad Maharaj says that in this material world, every living entity desires some future happiness, which is exactly like a mirage in the desert. That means in a desert, there is no water, but one thinks that he can get some water, and that process, if he gets a small drop of water, he thinks that he's relieved, but it's not so. There is the water in the desert, or in other words, Prahlad Maharaj says, there is the happiness in this material world. As far as this body, what is its value? It is merely a source of various diseases. This body is nothing but becomes a source of various types of diseases we see day in and day out. But the so-called philosophers, scientists, and politicians know this very well. Everyone knows that this body is prone to so much of disease, but it is said that they nonetheless they aspire for this temporary happiness. Everyone knows that it is not going to last for a long time, but still they aspire for this temporary happiness. Further, Prahlad Maharaj says, happiness is very difficult to obtain, but because they are unable to control their senses, they run after the so-called happiness, the material world, and never come to the right conclusion. So the point is that people are running after this material happiness, but never at any point of time they come to the right conclusion as to why this material happiness they are running after and what is it. It's an illusion. But a sensible person knows that, yes, I'm bound to lose these things and sometimes I have to give up. And one does not develop attachment, rather one becomes detached. Detachment does not necessarily means totally renouncing it. But from devotional angle point of view, when one uses everything in the service of the Lord, which is what devotional service is, then one uses their senses, their body, everything in the service of the Lord, and whatever they have, they use everything in the service of the Lord, so they don't develop attachment to it. And there are examples of how devotees who have understood the reality in life, they have left everything in a very nice way that exhibits their detachment. For example, we see that the whole battle of Kurukshetra took place. The Pandavas were again enthroned as the kings. And then at the right time, the Pandavas were never attached to their opulence or their kingdom. They realized, and as soon as the Lord left his, wound up his pastimes, they also thought that now it is not necessary, or now it's not right for us to continue to stay back in this material world. So Yudhishthira Maharaj was also he could see what was the symptom. He could see a lot of unforeseen circumstances that were visible to him as the age of Kali was progressing, and he could see falsehood, he could see cheating and violence everywhere. So he was prepared at the right time to leave the kingdom. So the Pandavas left their kingdom, their opulence, everything, and before that they enthroned their grandson and gave their empire to him, and then they left on a very renounced dress. They left. Actually, they didn't want to. I mean, when leaving a kingdom, one does not have to have these attachments. So even they left their dresses and left for renunciation. So they posted Vajra, or the son of Aniruddha, who is the grandson of Lord Krishna at Mathura, as the king of Shurasena. Then they performed a sacrifice and placed themselves a fire for quitting the household life. That means they performed a sacrifice for entering into the Vanaprastha stage from Grihastha stage. And the process, they relinquished all their garments, ornaments of the royal ladder, and became completely disinterested and unattached to anything. So this is how, even though one has got all the opulence, one must be in a position not to develop any attachment and not to develop too much of interest in all these things. So finally they wound up, they renounced everything and they entered into the death. Similarly, Parikshit Maharaj, the moment he realized that he has been cursed to death in 7 days, he did not waste a single moment. He became free from all the material attachment and surrendered unto the personality of Godhead, taking shelter of him. So we see here Mother Devahuti also taking shelter of Lord Kapila. So a sensible or intelligent person who's one who knows that as much as happiness comes, one also goes through a lot of distress, and one has to take shelter and surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So material attachment means ignorance of transcendental happiness. When one performs service to the Lord through devotional service, one understands what is permanent happiness or eternal happiness. Now, that is when one becomes eligible or competent to go back to Godhead, when one understands the difference between permanent happiness and temporary happiness. We see in the instructions of King Jadabharata, in the 5th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, the instructions he gives to King Raghugana, Jadabharata says, "My dear King Raghugana, the living entity wanders on the path of the material world, which is very difficult for him to traverse, and he accepts repeated birth and death. Being captivated by the material world under the 3 modes of material nature, the living entity can see only the 3 fruits of activities under the 3 modes of nature." That means the living entity looks at only the fruits that are obtained through these 3 modes of material nature. Whether they are auspicious or not, or mixed, one does not see, but then one sees everything as auspicious. When we desire something, we don't see anything auspicious in it. We always see, we don't see anything inauspicious. We always see positive and auspicious things, even though we know that it may bring some distress to us. And in the process, what happens? He thus becomes attached to religion, economic development, sense gratification, and finally liberation, for which a living entity works very hard day and night, exactly like a merchant who enters a forest to acquire some articles to sell later for profit. However, he cannot really achieve that profit what he desires. That means a merchant enters into a forest and gathers so many things to make some profit out of it and sell it. But whether he is able to make a profit or not, which he does not realize. So this is what is a permanent impermanent nature of happiness and distress in this material world. Now, the living entity within us, that the spirit soul, is eternal, it is blissful, it is full of knowledge, and it is also, the soul is also Satchidananda by its nature. But because it has got a material body, material covering, which is impermanent, it's an incompatible situation. And actually, the sense gratification is such that the more one tries to enjoy the senses, the more one gets into the miseries of life. In the yesteryears, years, people used to live more than 100 years. 110, 20 was very, very common. And they were living a very peaceful life because they were not indulging so much in sense gratification. But with the progress of Kali Yuga, people engaging more and more in sense gratification. We see children at a very young age having spectacles. Still, at a very young age, people have hearing problems. So many problems are there in the material body. For what? Because of addiction to sense gratification. They are prone to watching TV, mobile. Everyone is addicted to the mobile to such an extent that they start getting glasses for seeing at a very young age, because all these sense organs have lost their efficiency of utility. So therefore, the Lord is advising Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, says the senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places of these lusts. We have desires, and because of these desires, we have the lust that develops in our senses, mind, and the intelligence. So the Lord says, through them, the lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. So because of this lust, the real knowledge of the super soul or of the soul that is inside the body is covered, and we are bewildered. Therefore, the Lord concludes and says, therefore, Arjuna, best of the Bharata, in the very beginning, curb this great symbol of sin or lust by regulating the senses and slay this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. That means try to curb this symbol of lust by regulating the senses, which is the destroyer of the knowledge and real self-realization. That means we have knowledge and we have the understanding of self-realization, but then it is covered. So it requires a little intelligence to understand what is the difference between the temporary and the permanent. So Devahuti takes shelter of Lord Kapila and he gives us the teachings, which is a devotional service. Devotional service means freeing the senses from the material contamination. Therefore, Bhakti Sandhu mentions devotional service in practice means utilizing our different sensory organs in service of Krishna. Some of the senses are meant for acquiring knowledge and some for executing the conclusions of our thinking, feeling, and willing. As living entities, we have the thinking, willing, and feeling. So practicing means employing both the mind and the senses in practical devotional service. This practice is not for developing something artificial. For example, it is said that a child has got a natural tendency to walk. Initially, a child might try to struggle to walk, but it has got a natural tendency to walk. So similarly, by little practice, the devotional service to the Lord is already there in every living entity. But if it is awakened in the association of devotees by hearing the holy name of the Lord and so forth, this devotional service is awakened. So it is largely dormant in every living being. Therefore, devotional service means Sarvopadi Vinirmuktam Tatparatyanelmanam Shikena Shikesevam Bhakti Ruchate. Bhakti or devotional service means engaging all our senses in the service of the Lord, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the master of all the senses. One of the Lord's name is Rishikesha, that means he's the master of all senses. When the spirit soul renders service unto the Supreme, there are two side effects. One is freed from all material designations, and the other is one's senses are purified simply by being employed in the service of the Lord. So we have developed a lot of material designations in our life, birth after birth, time after time, species after species. We have designations in us. I'm a Brahmana, I'm a Kshatriya, I'm a vice president, I'm so and so. So all these designations, we become free by rendering devotional service. And other thing that happens is that our senses are purified. Now our senses are contaminated by trying to employ them in sense gratification. But by being employed in the service of the Lord, one's senses become purified. The same senses that bind us in this material world can free us from this bondage by simply using them in the service of Krishna. So bhakti is the ultimate process of utilizing the services in the service of the Lord, and that is the actual position of the soul. Another nice verse in the Padma Purana, which says, Ata Shri Krishna Namadi Nabhave Grahyam Indriya Sevanam Upehi Jigvado Swayameva Sparatataha. Because Krishna's form, qualities, pastimes, etc. are on the absolute platform, material senses cannot therefore appreciate them when a conditioned soul, material senses cannot appreciate them because we are on a temporary platform, whereas anything related to the Lord is on the absolute platform, transcendental platform. That is why they are not able to appreciate. But when a conditioned soul is awakened to Krishna consciousness and renders service by using his tongue to chant the Lord's holy names and taste the remnants of the Lord's food, the tongue is purified and one gradually comes to understand who Krishna is. So by engaging the senses, the service of the Lord, the senses are purified. Before I wind up the class, I would like to give an important quote in the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, where Lord Krishna tells Uddhava, he says, having awakened faith in the narrations of my glories, being disgusted with all material activities, knowing that all sense gratification leads to misery, but still being unable to renounce all sense enjoyment, my devotee should remain happy and worship me with great faith and conviction. That means when one develops faith in the hearing of the declarations of the Lord, even though disgusted with all the material activities, one might be even disgusted with all the material activities, and one might know that all the sense gratification leads to misery, still one finds it difficult to renounce the sense enjoyment. But having awakened the faith in the glories of the Lord says, my devotee should remain happy and worship me with great faith and conviction. So even though it may be difficult for us to renounce the sense gratification, but by being engaged in the service of the Lord, we should remain and worship the Lord with great faith and conviction. With determination, we should continue to practice devotion service. So then the Lord concludes by saying, even though he is sometimes engaged in sense enjoyment, my devotee knows that all the sense gratification leads to a miserable result, and he sincerely repents such activities. So in the initially stages of practice of devotional service, like sadhakas like us, we practice devotional service. We might have a taste for devotional service. At the same time, we may be thinking that I'm having some happiness in the sense gratification also. But one starts understanding that sense gratification leads to miseries and distress. And one sincerely starts repenting for such activities. This is the sign of a devotee. That though sometimes he practices devotion service and tries to enjoy, at the same time he realizes that that it is temporary and it leads to misery, he sincerely starts repenting for such activities. So with this, I conclude the class for the day. The next 1 or 2 minutes, I can take some questions and comments on today's subject matter. Any questions? Any comments? Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dandat Pranam.
Dandat Pranam, Prabhuji.
So this verse literally depicts what happens in this material world.
Yes,
but people are still inclined to doing what about this only, right? Enjoying the sense gratification.
Yes.
If we tell them to take a book, they don't want to take a book. We tell them to come to the program, they'll come to the program, but they don't want to chant. So how to bring change in them? How to bring change in them?
As Kali Yuga progresses, people are less and less inclined to spiritual activities. Nevertheless, everyone has got also miseries in their life and they are suffering, which they don't want to realize. But the more we try to give association to them, people are looking forward for something which they don't know. That vacuum is there. So some might take time, some might not take time. It may not happen in this birth also. Like for example, I was given a incident of someone who went to Australia last month. So those who went, they were not very religious minded also, but they saw the devotees chanting the name of the Lord, doing kirtan in the streets. So something they have heard. And Srila Prabhupada always mentions, yes, if they have heard also the name of the Lord, sometimes when they go through, some miseries, they will think, oh, that incident was very nice. So we should not look at what is happening today. We should not look at the result also. But can we continue with our determination to practice devotional service for ourselves, be very firm and fixed, and try to give our association to the others also. But this last conclusion which I gave, there might be interested in sense gratification and some might even understand, taste something in devotional service, but still it is a time-taking process. But a time will definitely come when they will realize, yes, what I have done is wrong. We have also come to devotional service through a lot of stages in life, not that we have straight away. I mean, at least in my case, I can tell you, at a very late age, whereas nowadays we find even children taking up the process of Krishna consciousness at very early age. So even a small thing of smelling a flower that is offered to the Lord, little bit of prasadam that we give, that is enough to give them some remembrance of an incident that happened in their life. So some time might come, they might go through a lot of distress, which is given in this example of Mother Devotee. She's a devotee of the Lord, but she's exhibiting the condition of the situation of a conditioned soul. Conditioned souls are like that. They're trying to run after artificial happiness, but we try to put at the same time our efforts to give them whatever possible association we can, give them some little prasadam, give them some flowers and so forth. We have to continue our endeavor, and then we leave the rest to the Lord.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank you, Prabhu. Anybody else, any other question? Can I take the class as close, Prabhu? Can I leave?
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Granth Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki